And so we're going to go into this was a debate. I don't know, really a debate, more of a discussion. But Sam Seder is on this show. Sam Seder was host of the Majority Report. They're a big show. We've clipped them before. They're actually a really good show if you haven't seen it. Um, and he's on this show called the Peter Bet David Show or Patrick Bet David. I'll get it right here in a minute. But so they're having a discussion about the Fed here, and then they'll go into taxes. But we're going to look at what their discussion about the Fed, and we'll start here with Sam talking a little bit about it because he ends up doing most of the talking in this discussion anyway. Oh, whoops.
Capacity to meet demand. It was just that it was mismatched for a long time. You're sending shipping containers to places you had never sent it before.
So he's talking about the supply problem after COVID, where things were tough to get and demand shot up.
To get them back is a lot more expensive. These things are starting to work through the system. Wages contribute a little bit because there has been some wage growth for the first time in decades, essentially.
All right. And I'm sorry, he's talking about inflation and how all this stuff affected inflation. So first off, supply demand problems, then yes, wage growth, but this is the first wage growth we've seen really in decades. So, and that affected a little bit. As we said, the San Francisco Federal Reserve said about 20% of inflation is probably attributable to wage growth.
A lot of it is also maybe the plurality of it. This is based upon the Fed numbers, is basically just the corporations seeing the opportunity to raise these rates. And so
Also
the Fed
true.
comes in, they have one tool to deal with inflation, and that is, they're a hammer. Except for I'm arguing that it's not a nail that they're hitting, it's a screw. And they're doing this, in my estimation, as a way of weakening labor. They are going to kick a million people.
How would you do it?
How would I do it? Well, I would deal with it fiscally, or I would just wait. I would wait because you're starting to see the trends all move in the right direction in terms of inflation, and I would wait.
So you wouldn't have raped.
So essentially, Sam just made the argument we've been making for the last couple of weeks, which is inflation's already going down. Why are you raising interest rates and squeezing it? Right?
Right. We keep asking, do you actually need to do anything? Why don't you just hang out and see if this keeps going the right way?
Right. So I want to show you this real quick. So there's two kind of methods when you're talking about inflation the government has to deal with this. This goes basic Keynesian economics. If you take economics in college, they'll cover this shit. But we're going to go just look at this real quick. And the first is monetary policy. And monetary policy is what's called demand pull inflation control, right? So the government does monetary policy or measures. So what does that mean? So monetary would be the Federal Reserve, which is basically the bank for the U.S. government. And what they're going to do is they're going to either buy more, they'll buy or they'll either buy more bonds from people or start paying back their bonds that they've issued, their treasuries. And when they do that, what ends up happening is less cash is in the system. It's now more illiquid. They're just making it illiquid again because they're buying it. If they buy the bonds back, they're putting more cash. If they're selling more bonds and not releasing cash or buying bonds, then they're sucking cash out of the system. So the amount of cash hasn't changed. The amount of liquid cash that we can spend has changed. That's one thing. Now we saw that with quantitative easing. That's one of the tools. Now, the main thing they do with inflation, though, is they can change the interest rate between the banks because all the banks have to loan dollars from the Fed because all the dollars sit in the Fed. The Treasury prints the money and deposits it at the bank, the Federal Reserve, right?
Right.
And so the Federal Reserve can say, well, we're going to change the interest rates of how much we loan U.S. money out for other banks because the big banks have to go to the Fed. And then the medium-sized banks have to go to the big banks, and the big banks are going to up their rates a little bit because they need to make money, right? And then so on and so on down the line, and that ups the rates overall. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right. So when the Fed says we're going to raise rates by 0.25%, that could translate to 2 or 3% to you and me when we're buying a car or a house or something else. Because by the time it goes through all the banks borrowing,
little channels and filters and whatever, and makes it all the way to us.
Yep.
That %, that doesn't sound like much. In parentheses, I will say, the bigger the loan, even 0.25% is a flipping lot of money if you've got a big enough loan. Maybe not on a little like couple $1,000 thing, but
well, I'll give you this: 30-year mortgages last year, at the same time, were about 3.4%. Now they're 7%. That's because the Fed's partly mainly because the Fed's been raising these rates. I mean, there are other factors, but that's the big one, right? So that's what the Fed is doing right now. Now, when it does that and raises those interest rates, it means businesses borrow less money. So if businesses are trying to expand or hire more people or things like that, they can't do it. So businesses tend to shrink the number of people, try to shrink their wage costs to maximize their profits, which ends up meaning they lay off people and squeeze the job market and try to lower the wages. And that's what's going on. So that's what's happening right now is the Fed is trying to squeeze the job market and lower the wage amounts, thinking that's going to offset inflation. But once again, our argument was that's not the big cause of inflation. And it probably won't do much of anything. And it might not do anything. But that's what Sam's basically arguing. It's basically that argument. And that was the argument we did. The professor from Wharton made the same argument.
Right. A number of weeks ago, we essentially did the very same thing.
Yeah. So Sam's just making the same argument. So let's see what they do from here.
I would have probably done maybe half of what they've done. Maybe.
So 2.5, whatever the number is.
Yeah.
You mean the most recent?
No.
Right?
He's
No,
saying
today,
whatever's
I
happened.
mean, look at it today, right? Like they're worried about the banks. At the same time, they're like desperate to we need to kick 1 million, 2 million, 3 million people out of work. They're explicitly saying this.
So I'm gonna go with this. So Sam is he's right and he's sort of wrong, not entirely wrong. To say we're worried about the banks are pissed about them raising the rates because it cuts what they can do. It costs them money. And you got to remember, banks are required to have certain types of investments. Not all of the banks, but most of them are, right? So we're buying the investments as the bank that are treasuries, they're low interest, blah, 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 blah. They're secure. Now we have these things. Now you're raising the interest rates. Well, our stuff is getting, say, 2%. Well, now you've raised the interest rates, so now all the new issues coming out are getting 3 or 4. So now the value of all of our stuff has gone down. Because why would you buy ours at 2% for the same price as one you can get with 3 or 4% interest? Right?
Right.
It does when you can make more money. So now we have to sell our stuff at a discount if we go into problems, or we have to raise money. So you just shrunk our bottom line heavily. You just upped our red and narrowed our black because it's not worth as much. The shit in our vault is not worth as much as it was before. So the banks are pissed too, right? So this isn't really helping the banks. So this is part of what's causing the banking problem. The banks don't have as much liquid shit. And anything they sell, they're going to have to sell at a loss. So you kind of missed the point there. But, but he makes the good point but the real thing is, if this goes into, you squeeze the job market and we go into recession, it's going to be about 2 million people that are going to lose jobs and stuff. But, it's going to hurt everybody for the most part, especially working class people. So it's kind of a whole stupid thing. I can't remember if Patrick Bet-Davis, what's his name? Let me make sure I get it. Patrick Bet-David. Sorry, I can't remember if he has a response to this. We'll see if he does, real quick.
And so, that does not make sense to me.
Sam, a guy here, Scott Rodriguez, just said, sorry, but 80% of the loans given the last 3 years only required 5% down payment. It was much harder to get a loan in the 90s.
In terms of mortgages?
Yeah, that's irrelevant. The down payment amount is kind of irrelevant to the discussion. We're talking about the interest. So I don't know where he's going from there. But let's move on to the next part, because now they talk about, in the same debate, they're talking about where do they go from there? Taxes, I think. So yeah, so they're talking about wage growth. Oh, they're going to talk about wage growth and productivity here real quick. And we'll talk about this because this is really important for people to understand.
And cooling the economy. And frankly, I mean, this is the charitable view. I'm articulating the charitable view. And to cool the economy means, as a byproduct, that you're going to kick people out of work. In my estimation, this is the first time we've seen any type of wage growth in decades. Right? The wages versus productivity has been out of sync for decades. And I think, frankly, people don't want labor to have any power. You're seeing increased unionization. You're seeing increased work action. You're seeing people saying, like, I don't want to work in the... Yes, I definitely...
You really think... You think Powell's playing politics in increasing
this
interest?
This is not politics.
But it is, though. Union is a form of... Your policies... Powell is one of the most powerful men in the world today. You know that. I know that, right? So when he moves he's controlling one of the most important knobs, right? Which is the rates.
Without a doubt.
Yeah. So, but I'm trying to think myself. Like, I'm trying to sit there and say, okay, when they gave $1.7 trillion in, relief, hey, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, or during COVID, hey, we're going to give $2.1 trillion, we're going to send people this much of money, this, that. Hey, all they're trying to do is they're trying to get people not to work, right? That's what they're trying to do. Are they really, or were they doing it because they're like, dude, I'm not letting you work from home, so I have to send some money to you if you're getting unemployed, and I just laid off how many people at the restaurants were crushed by COVID? Well, I got to kind of take care of you. But then what happened with the money? The money went into the rich because, the low income, middle income doesn't know how to save money. And they spend the money. They're trying to make ends meet. So sometimes you think from the policies and you say, oh, they're trying to do something really bad. You think Powell has negative intentions or, well.
Okay, so it's going into an ad. We caught that just in time. So,
well, that's an interesting question that he's posing.
What, the Powell?
Are his intentions? Yeah. What are his intentions actually good? I'm kind of curious about kind of what the rest of that thought was exactly on his part. But
we'll get to it. But the rest is. But let's say it doesn't. I mean, we can speculate on what Powell's intentions are. I do think that there's good reason, because there's not a real great argument for raising the interest rates other than we're trying to squash the labor movement that's happened after COVID. That's driven up wages, the higher demand for unions, more people applying for unions. It's happened at Amazon, Starbucks. Go through the list. We just saw the bit with the Teamster was in the Senate yelling at the senator, and the senator looked like a total idiot, right? UPS. I mean, so there's a lot of people that are out there going, no, we want higher wages. We want to get paid better. And I think what Patrick Bet-David is missing in this whole thing is he's trying to well, do you think it's intention or not intention? It's not really relevant what his intentions are. What's relevant is what's happening. And so I think Sam gets into this in one of our later videos, but this was just a Washington Post article about productivity and wages, right? So if you go down, so we'll do this. How do I do this? I always forget how to do this. There's got to be a way to. I always do this. Oh, here we go. There we go. Can you see that a little bit better?
Yeah.
We'll scroll in a little bit. Nice.
Yeah, that's better.
All right. So this is the gap between productivity and typical workers' compensation. So notice this. In the 70s, it starts to split, right? in the early 70s, mid 70s. The blue line is hourly compensation. The dark blue line or green line, whatever that is productivity. So worker productivity kept going up and up and up and up consistently. See, it's almost linear. However, by the time you get to the 70s and especially the 80s, right, and they start breaking and taxes go a lot lower and compensation doesn't really go up, what happens? It flattens out. So workers are working harder, making the bosses more money, and they're not getting paid anymore.
What for it?
And they're getting paid nothing. And then I think there's some more in here. Let's see. So the labor share of total income from 1960 to 2020. You can see it was really good, and then blam. So we don't get as much income as the bosses. And we've been well below the average for a long time. Yeah, we'll just go with those two graphs for now. But that's kind of the whole spiel. The whole hang on a second. The whole kit and caboodle there that Sam's getting at, which is there is a gap here where wages haven't increased. Now all of a sudden they're starting to increase. Granted, they're not keeping pace with inflation, but they're going up for the first time since the 80s, really. The late 70s, early 80s, we're starting to see wage growth. And we start to see workers demanding unions and stuff. And now what's happening is there's an inflation problem too. And the Fed now, their only solution is to squeeze the job market and lower wages.
Yeah.
And that's the attack. Yeah, I think it's suspicious. Can I say for sure that's his intent? No, but you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's reasonable to question it.
Absolutely. So let's see if Patrick, because he's kind of going on a weird diatribe here, and I'm having a hard time following him, but let's see if he gets to a point.
Oh,
He just sees this as a.
I don't think any of this. I have a different perspective on how all this works. I don't think that Powell is sitting there going like it's going to negative. I just don't think that these people care. I mean, look, we attacked Iraq, right? 20-year anniversary yesterday or two.
Well, I guess he didn't get to a point. We'll just leave it there.
Yeah, let's leave it there because they're about to go to
somewhere else.
Their place. Yeah.
So the last thing they talk about in this, well, I mean, they talk about a lot of stuff. We're not going to watch the whole thing. But the last thing they talk about that I want to cover here, because it ties it all together, and I think, honestly, this is where I think Sam got really close, and he kind of missed it. And I don't blame him because I don't think he would know this, but well, I'll show you where it's like, I think he's right on everything, but I think he's more right than he knows.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he missed it. So,
like he might have accidentally stumbled onto something.
Well, no, he makes the argument we've been making, but he gets right up to it, but I don't think he knows how to close it because I don't think he's not a finance person or an economist, so he wouldn't understand necessarily what the argument is. But they're talking about
there through his own series of logic. He kind of got there.
I think he understands the politics enough, and he's talked to enough professionals to have a good idea of what the right direction is, but to actually sell it all out now. So they're talking about taxes. They're going to start with the Laffer curve. So Art Laffer, for kids who don't know, remember Ferris Bueller's Day Off? Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a bit with Ben Stein, who plays the teacher, and he's talking about what is this? It's the Laffer curve, right? So the Laffer curve was a stupid thing that happened in the 80s, and Reagan went with it, and it's the Reaganomics thing. And the idea is we cut taxes, right? And it'll raise tax revenue because people will be making more money because the rich will make more money, and that'll trickle down to the poor. And we've been sort of doing that for the last 40 years. And guess what's never happened? The money has never trickled down to the poor, so it's never worked. So they're going to start with that, and I think they're going to, because Patrick Bet David, I think, is arguing for it, and Sam's kind of laughing about it. So they're going to talk about it real quick.
Are going to be to generate income, and then
Let's go back.
Because they're
1 sec. Let's go back.
I said, "What happened? We haven't seen you lately." It's so funny you ask. My husband and I made a decision that the moment taxes got so high, it was more important for me to be stay home. It wasn't worth me working to pay this much in taxes. So there's a part of what he's saying. Yeah, whatever, whether he's going to do the movie.
I think that's great. No, I guess
but there's a part of it that kind
Oh,
of
hang on.
needs to be there.
I went back too far.
Right? Like the Laffer curve argues that the higher the tax rate goes,
There we go.
the less inclined people are going to be to generate income. And then because they're generating less money, there's going to be less tax receipts collected by the government. Art Laffer was Sam Brownback's #1 advisor in Kansas. Do you remember this when Brownback became governor? He basically gave over his entire tax structure to Art Laffer. It destroyed the tax base in Kansas. It ended up destroying their entire education system. They had an amazing Kansas university. Brownback gets plucked out of Kansas and literally sent to be ambassador to Ether. You know what? They made him ambassador to faith because they didn't want this guy around at all. The Republican-controlled Kansas legislature raised taxes back up because it had destroyed their tax receipts. The theory may sound good, but it doesn't work in practice.
So are you on YouTube and Rumble or just YouTube?
That's the response to that. So they were arguing for the Laffer curve, right? And he makes an argument. I skipped it because it's kind of long and tedious, but he makes the argument because Sam's saying, well, you know what? What if taxes went up to, marginal tax rate went up to 90%, like it was in the 50s, right? Top marginal tax rate. And he was like, well, what if, YouTube started charging you 90% or 90 cents on a dollar for every dollar you made for advertising, right? And he's like, but that's different. You're talking about a business that I subscribe to cutting my revenue, not me being taxed after I collect my revenue. There's separate things, right? And that was essentially his argument for the Laffer curve. So essentially, here's the argument they didn't understand and why it's so funny. But I think that was hilarious that once Sam makes that point, so are you on YouTube or Rumble? Let's change the subject because I got nothing. But here's the argument. So currently, the top marginal tax rate is 37% in the United States this year, 2023. I don't know. You might be watching this years from now, but it's 2023 right now. So let's say I have a guy and he's making $5 million a year in his business. Okay. Well, I want you to understand the upper rate right now, if they moved it to 90, that wouldn't apply to anyone making under 3. So that 90%, that top rate applies to over 3 million. And that 37% applies to about over 3 million now too, right? So let's say my $5 million guy, currently with his 30% top marginal rate, his actual effective tax rate, it would be 36.16%. That's what he'd pay in tax, right? And his federal tax total would be 1.8 million. Okay. Now that same guy, if we move to a 90% from a 37% top marginal tax rate, that first 3 million would be taxed the same as this first 3 million was taxed. But every dollar after that would be taxed 90% on the dollar. So his effective tax rate with this would be 57%, so it would be 20% more, and he'd pay 2.8 or 2.9 million, so about $1 million more. Okay. This only affects people over 3 million a year, 4.41% of the population. Only affects the wealthiest 5.7 million people in the country moving to this tax rate. But what it does is it answers Paul Krugman's question. And it is Paul Krugman's answer, which is if you raise the top marginal tax rate, we wouldn't have the wealth inequality problem as bad. So it solves a lot of problems just right there, which I think is kind of an amazing.
The people that have want to keep being the people that have.
Right, and they don't want to. They don't want to give it
They
up.
don't want to be on the same level with other people.
No. But that's the point. So this guy, Patrick Bet-David, I think is struggling with that. But here's where they miss it, because Sam does mention it earlier, where he talks about, I think maybe we could solve this fiscally. All right. So let's look at what a fiscal solution might look like. We looked at the monetary, right? The monetary solution is we squeeze the amount of cash in the system, or we raise interest rates to squeeze the amount of cash in the system. And that would affect workers, and that could potentially lead to recession and 2 million people going out of work. And then, lots of other people struggling. What would be a fiscal solution? Not the Federal Reserve. A fiscal solution would be the Treasury, the federal government dealing with it, Congress dealing with it, right? So a fiscal solution involves actual cash into the system. So what you could do is, from fiscal policy measures to control inflation, you could decrease overall government expenditures and transfer payments. So you could decrease how much you spend on military spending or whatever, right? Or businesses that the government sends grants to, because that would shrink. Or you could increase rates of taxes, causing individuals to decrease their total expenditure. So if we raise the top marginal tax rate potentially, we would decrease total expenditure. Potentially.
Honestly, I don't think it's a terrible plan, but the people who have, like I said, the people who have, they like being the haves over the have-nots.
But the other argument is this, and this is where it gets interesting. Their whole thing is, well, if you increase their taxes, they're less likely to want to hire people or expand their businesses because they're making less money. That's actually false, because what ends up happening is if I'm making $5 million a year, right, and you increase my tax to everything over $3 million, right, being 90% taxed, well, instead of taking my $3 million or my $5 million as a business owner, right, and collecting it as income, why wouldn't I just take the 3 and put the other 2 back into my business and invest it in my business by expanding and hiring more people?
Right. Keep Uncle Sam's hands off more of it by putting it straight back into the business, as opposed to in your own pocket, where Uncle Sam goes, "Hey, I got my hand out."
Right.
Right.
So there are other things here, but there is a solution where it's like, yeah, if we raise taxes potentially, especially on the upper class, I mean, not just this, but I mean, other tax positions that we could pull, that would squeeze some of the money, but you wouldn't be squeezing the poorest of Americans, it'd be squeezing the richest of Americans to solve the inflation problem. But you notice how that's never on the table, right? And we don't ever discuss it. I think, I don't blame Sam for missing it, because nobody really talks about it. But it is a solution, But yeah, but I think that was a good point he made on that one. So we're going to wrap up this thing. So this debate kind of got shouted out a bit, which is how I caught it. But Joe Rogan, very famous, with his $100 million from Spotify that he got, doing his podcast, and that's what he does now. And he's just he does a lot of weird stuff. He has a lot of like anti-trans and crazy people on and whatnot, but he does not like Sam Seder apparently. So he's doing this dig on Sam Seder's debate, but he doesn't ever mention his name because he's afraid of him or something. I don't know. But let's watch.
It doesn't like giving attention to other people, in that sort of a way.
Or something, yeah. But we're gonna watch him. We're gonna watch him sort of dog on Sam Seder, and he's gonna make the same mistake, and it's gonna be kind of fun. So let's watch him real quick.
future healthy, happy life, and what's the impediment of those prospects, and how do we mitigate all these issues like inner city crime, violence, gangs, like all that should be of primary concern to anyone who's like, if you're running this country and you're saying, you know, we want to make the greatest country the world has ever known, we think we have the greatest country, we can make it even better, and here's how. The number one would be we got to fix the ghettos. Number one, we got to the economic disparity, the disparity in terms of the prospects that people have for living a normal, healthy life without violence and crime. The difference between someone who's born in Baltimore and someone who's born in Beverly Hills are so off the charts different, and no one's doing jack shit to try to even that out. Like this idea about like financial equality, like that's not, you're not going to achieve that because you're not going to achieve effort equality. People, there's certain people who are just going to always work harder than other people. This idea of like we need to redistribute. I was watching this.
For 1 second, possible.
Okay, so once again, it goes back to our initial point, right? Yes, we all recognize the problem, right? I would also say not just the ghettos, but rural communities really suffer, and they suffer from a lot higher crime per capita than a lot of the cities. So yeah, I mean, yeah, certainly a lot of people we could be helping out, but well, we can't redistribute the wealth, according to Joe Rogan, because income equality is never going to be achieved because some people work harder because that's how people make money, by working hard. But we just watched Paul Krugman explain, no, most people are inheriting it anymore, or they get it from their parents. It's not because they're harder workers. That's all gone. That era is over. If you thought that existed today, it's a pretense. It's not real. Right? So he's wrong on that point to sit there and go, well, yeah, income inequality because some people are harder workers. I'm like, Jesus, Joe, you do not work as hard as a lot of people, and you're worth $100+ million. There are people working 2-3 jobs making $50,000 a year, much harder working than you. They didn't get any advantages. So that's all nonsense, but that's the mentality that has to go into it as well. No, if it's just about work ethic and it's just about that, we can ignore the solution, because the solution of actually having to just redistribute the wealth, we don't want to talk about that. So it's got to be that it's all personal responsibility, and then it's a big problem, but then what's the solution? There is no solution. Everybody's just on their own, which is convenient when you already are wealthy.
It's like, well, sorry about your luck.
Right.
I guess that sucks.
I've already won the game.
I'm going to go hang out on my yacht now.
Yeah, this is really we're ahead by 1 touchdown at the third, end of the third quarter. So we're going to end the game now while we're ahead. It's like, no, we still got game to play, brother. But they don't want to do that. We got to skip by it. So we're going to go to his next thing here. But this is how stupid it is. But he's emblematic. Amplifies. He's emblematic and amplifies. Sorry. I had the 2 words together. He's emblematic. We're going to put the words together. Emblematic of the problem, which is we recognize the issue, but we don't like the solution, so we're just going to ignore it, that there's a problem. Or we're going to say the problem can't be solved, which is what he's doing. Which is what they all do, all the conservatives do on all the finance channels that we watch. And it's bullshit. But he's the poster child they're talking to, and he's regurgitating it.
Conversation where this fucking dork was trying to say that all money.
Okay, the dork he's talking about is Sam Seder.
Over over $3 million that a person makes should be taxed at 90%. Like, that's great for you to say, because you're never going to make $3 million, you fucking idiot. But that's so stupid. The idea behind it is so stupid. The understanding of where that money goes is so stupid. The understanding of incentives. What about fucking venture capital money? What about all the fucking money that you need to make an iPhone? Do you think anything's going to happen if you tax everybody over $3 million, 90%? No. Where's the money going, by the way? It's just...
We already explained. That's the problem, is he doesn't know. And we just explained it. Tends to go back into your business because you don't want to pay the tax on it. I mean, that's what tends to happen. It tends to go back into investment in business, hiring more people, expanding companies.
Give a few raises to some well-deserving people, maybe create a few positions that let people move up. Maybe you create some of the lower level positions so you can have more positions in general. Yeah, all sorts of things.
Right. Plus, some people are going to collect it, and the tax revenue is going to go up significantly. But where do you think an iPhone comes from? I don't know where Joe Rogan thinks an iPhone comes from, because it wasn't developed by private industry. The technology for that, I mean, yeah, Apple developed it, but the technology for it was not developed by private industry. It was developed by universities and government giving grants. The cell phone towers, the satellites, all that shit funded by government. I mean, which comes from what? Tax money. So if we have more tax money, we're throwing more into R&D, which makes us more competitive, which makes us a bigger problem for Russia and China and all these countries they want to go to war with. I mean, it's such a, we can't. It's one of those where it's like, it's like the general saying, no, we have to stand in a line out in the open, right? When the soldiers are sitting there going, yeah, but the American troops are hiding behind trees, shooting at us and picking us off one by one. Yeah, but traditionally we stand in a line in the open, shoulder to shoulder. Yeah, but the Americans are hiding behind it now, but we stand in a line. I mean, it's the same. There's no solution, guys. There's no solution to this problem. Really? Could we change the color of our uniforms from red to, I don't know, brown, and maybe fucking hide or lay on the ground or something?
Right? Instead of look like a freaking beacon to be shot at.
Right.
Sign me up for that, please.
But that's the point, is no, it doesn't work. It can't work. That's stupid. Nope. Da. So anyway, I'm just going to close it on that. But that's the point, is yep, we know the problem. We have a pretty good idea what the solutions are. Absolutely, raising taxes would help dramatically our economy. It would help the lower class quite a bit. Might actually help the inflation issue right now. I mean, there's lots of benefits here that could be happening. But we can't talk about raising taxes because that's stupid, because wealth equality will never happen, because it's all about personal responsibility and, fuck the poor.
Well, the ones, talking about personal responsibility are the ones that very simply don't want to give up their lot in life. King talks about it in Letter from Birmingham Jail that, rarely does the person who has a particular advantage want to give up their advantage for the sake of other people being equal to them.
No.
You have to apply some sort of pressure to require it. So what does that pressure look like in this particular situation? You know?
Well, right now it's voting and unionizing and asking for more wages, but they're going to push whatever buttons they can. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of our thing about it. I mean, like I said, I think Sam was more right than he knew, because the tax situation might actually quell the inflation problem a lot better than a monetary policy, a fiscal policy of raising tax.
Right.
And the government said, hey, I mean, if you're going to, because they subsidize a lot of like the farms and stuff and things like that. But it's like, okay, if I'm subsidizing the farm as the federal government, and it's like, okay, you guys are jacking, not Safeway, but let's say some milk companies jacking up the price of milk. I might tell the farms, well, I'm going to reduce your subsidies if you sell to that company who overpricing milk. Or you have to price milk at X amount, or companies can only charge X amount. If otherwise, we're going to lose subsidies. I mean, there are lots of things you could do along the line because the government pays for a lot of shit that people forget about. So anyway, so that was our income inequality and federal policy kind of stuff.